presentation, and that is just keep you on mute. If you do have a question, just type it into the chat window for everyone to see. And then, when we have a discussion, you can unmute yourself and we can keep the discussion going that way. But just while you're not talking, if you could keep your microphones muted, that will help with background noise levels. Okay, so if you can't see that screen at the moment, which should be the start, just let me know, but I think it's all right in terms of what everyone's looking at. Here's the agenda for today. So just a bit of context about where we're going with Earth observation over the next 10 years. Item 2 will be an update on the community plan and how we've moved forward to implementing the various components of that. So particularly the role of the steering committee, singular, and the working groups and what they're doing. The bulk of today is on those current status activities and engagement, which is really how we're getting going with implementing that plan. Then we'll finish off with sort of next steps and other business. Hopefully what you see from today's webinar is that we are starting to move forward actively in terms of implementing aspects of the plan. We have sourced funding from at least one area and hopefully more for ongoing activities as well. And as usual, we'll take other business at the end and aim to close just before 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So again, just a reminder for those of you just joining us, if you can just keep your microphones on mute. If you do have questions, just type them into the chat window. And when we have discussions, you can unmute your microphones. So just a reminder of where we're going. We do have a 10-year plan. This is quite important. We all know that, but a lot of other people who are building applications in the spatial sciences area, applications using spatial information, building space industry policy, don't necessarily know that as a community we're organised and have a plan. One other thing of note is we are trying to go through and rebrand everything from the Australian Earth Observation Community Coordination Group to Earth Observation Australia. Hopefully we've got all of those things done. If you do come across some material where we've missed this on our website or documentation, please let us know as well. But key point today and for our other sort of engagement activities with industry and government and beyond is we do have this plan and we are implementing it. So in terms of how we're implementing it at the moment, so just an update of where we're going. We've moved to actually having a business plan in place which sets up what the steering committee and working groups are now doing in more detail, with the steering committee having oversight for coordination and the working groups dealing with each of the individual priorities. And the responsibilities of those various two groups of people are outlined in the steering committee document. The only thing we're looking at the moment is modifying the terms on each of those groups of people, so it is longer than a year, so we can get things done. So when we come back with some details on that from the steering committee and working groups, it'll be communicated across the whole of the group's email list. So just in terms of where we are with 2018 activities, in early March we moved to having over 400 official signed on members. We now cover all states and territories. We do have representatives across almost all Commonwealth agencies using Earth observation. We are now starting to engage more actively with some of the industry coordination groups, particularly SEBA, GITA and several others as well. The working groups, and now there's 5 working groups in place that have been seated with key people, and each working group is responsible for one of the priorities of the plan. The steering committee is responsible for the continued national coordination as a whole of what goes on within the plan, and how we put together the implementation plans for each priority and our actions. In terms of outcomes that have followed from our initial release of the plan in 2016, in 2017, we set up our implementation plan. We had traction with Earth observation infrastructure proposal as part of the National Research Infrastructure Plan. We're part of the Spatial 2026 Agenda's Action Plan. We've been a large part of the discussions in the expert working group around the Space Industry Capability Review, which we'll come back to later on today. So we've had traction so far, but we need to keep building on that throughout the rest of the year. In terms of the steering committee, these are the main coordination tasks that they're in charge of. In terms of what we're focusing on between the second quarter in 2018, what we're looking at is how do we start delivering the 10-year plan and the business plan. And that is about getting working groups going and having each working group having a strategic implementation plan. So that's what the steering committee is focusing on at the moment as a primary activity. There are some other activities there in terms of resourcing, getting funding, running webinars, etc., setting up the space agency that we're doing in parallel, but the main activity of the steering committee is getting things going in this place. Okay, so those are the 5 priority areas that we have. So just those are the areas where people are now going to be starting to doing work, and we have a working group on each of those. So connection and coordination, securing our role internationally, infrastructure and people, access to data and services, and then generating value, which is end user engagement. So the working groups at the moment, their activities in the next quarter are really about developing implementation strategies for addressing each of these priorities. So each working group has a standard layout for those implementation strategies, which we went through at the meeting yesterday, which will then start to build, and we can use that to work out ways forward in future. So that's roughly where we're at with those activities at the moment. All right, so I'll just move to current status and engagement reports, which actually covers a whole range of different topics as well. So in terms of Australia's potential space agency and the role of Earth observation in that and other relevant policies, the expert working group, reference group that was established in the middle of last year by the current Australian Commonwealth Government, and which is implementing this review of Australia's space industry capability, are due to release their report. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Were due to release their report in March of 2018. I think, as we all know, it's now April, and we haven't seen anything formally released. We do know a draft has gone in to the Minister's office for consideration, but nothing has been released publicly in this space. Just an update for people who weren't part of this previously, Earth Observation Australia did put in a formal response to that review document, which addressed the terms of reference. Our members also contributed to the detailed discussions which were held in most capital cities around Australia. And based on feedback that we have from the chair of that committee, the critical role of Earth observation as an enabler for any space industry development was recognised by the committee. That's reflected in some of the reports that came out at the end of last year in support of this review, and those are highlighted on the right there. So we are at the stage where we're waiting to hear what the government is going to do. And I guess if members do have news on this, it would be helpful to share these in the discussion later on or email them in. What we have heard in general is at the latest we will hear a response or details about a planned space agency at the latest in the budget announcement mid-year. There are several events prior to that there may be announcements made about the direction that this is going, and that includes the South Australian Space Conference, which is on in Adelaide next week. So I don't have any more details to share on that area, but we'll come back to that later on. That particular report, this ACIL Allen one, is quite important because when you do look at this report and what's likely to come out of the expert working or reference group, you have a look at the role of Earth observations in the little table there, the space industry supply chain. It's that middle component in terms of space systems, ground systems, applications and services. It is the one from an Australian point of view where we've got established government at state and Commonwealth levels, established private industry, which are doing a lot in the ground systems area and the applications area and the interactions with users as well. It is something that we can potentially build on as a pillar for any space industry development, and our responses to the expert reference working group were around building up those areas. So it's been assuring to see in reports like this that the critical role of Earth observation is recognised and that it can lead to more upstream activities in terms of designing and building sensors, launching satellites, as well as ground systems and more applications. So again, Earth observation sort of a key component. If you look at cross-sectoral applications as well, it basically spans all of those areas as well. So that the argument that we'll be using or have used previously in interacting with the government and other political parties is that Earth observation is an enabler for these cross-sectoral interactions. To put some international context on where we're going with this, we do have previous reports that show, how much is Earth observation worth, who are the people who are actually using it, where the market actually is. This is one of the things that comes back as a query when we start talking about space industry development and public-private partnerships is, well, where is it going to go and who's using it? Out of all of the potential space industry applications, we have documented this quite well from an Australian point of view, and these are two reports from 2015 that outline that. What we're seeing now at an international level, and this is a report that came out in March that was done internationally. The link to the report is down the bottom there. This was looking at geospatial industries globally, and it was also looking at it on a country-by-country basis in terms of how ready each country is internationally to take up and build on positioning and navigation systems and Earth observation systems and geospatial analysis. It's worth having a look at if you've got 15, 30 minutes spare just to see where people see Earth observation and associated technologies going. If you have a look at that, the bottom diagram, which is on your right there, it's essentially showing how geospatial technologies flow through to having economic impacts. So the figures on the far right are global economic impacts in an annual context over a year. And what it's showing is starting from geospatial technologies on the left, what's driving changes in those technologies, what are the business processes using those technologies, who's using it, and then what's the value that they could find globally for doing that. So, Earth observation, as you can see, is one of the key components there. Obviously, we all know those different data technology drivers, big data, cloud computing, AI, and automation. There's probably some other ones as well. And if you look at the application sectors, Earth observation fits into all of those areas as well. That report has specific sections on the different potential current and predicted markets for GNS and positioning, spatial analytics, Earth observation and 3D scanning. I've copied the graph from the Earth observation market size analysis up to 2017, which you can see there in $1 billion. You can see that they've actually built this summary from a range of reports globally. And then there's the projected growth, so it's there. So the point of mentioning this is that in discussions we might have, or others might have, in Australia we know the value of this. We're now starting to see how it's going globally and where Earth observation fits in. Those of you that are more interested in private capital investment in the space area, this is particularly important around the space industry capability. This is a report that's produced every quarter by the Space Angels group that looks at private investment in space. There's 4 graphs on the right-hand panel there. The top one showing the number of launches in 2017 in terms of satellites, and you can see the bulk of those were launched for Earth observation activities. The interesting thing you can see in the bottom graph, the red or orange column is government launches and the blue columns are commercial launches. So we've got the commercial launch sector starting to approach what governments are doing as well. But the key point there is, the bulk of launches and operations are around Earth observation, even though a large part of that's going to be planets constellation there. Right. Anyway, so those slides were just to give us an idea of where we're going with industry and growth in this space as well. Okay, so what's happening in Australia? Well, we talked about the review process that we're waiting for. I just want to switch to something just for 4 minutes, just to show a video which some of you may have seen, which sums up to a certain extent how maybe Commonwealth and state politicians are seeing where we're going in space. So, if you just bear with me for a second, this is going to switch. And I'm just going to have to stop sharing and then share a different screen. Okay. All right, so hopefully now you can see my web browser and this is going to play. So let's just give it a second to get going. And if you can't hear things, let me know. The audio will start in a second.
Senator Carr, you announced today Labour's version of a space agency, a vision for what could be. Can you just very quickly describe?
Well, what we want to see is an agency that is able to build the industry in this country and double it, 10,000 extra jobs over 5 years, so that we're able to take our part, our proper place in the world, build international investment, build Australian companies working with Australian science agencies for the, making sure that we get the very best out of what we can do well, so that the industry and the university and science agencies are able to tell the government what's the future look like.
Throughout all of this, I noted we were hearing about jobs for people on Earth, not so much sending people into space. That's right. That's
the key issue here is how do we make this program that helps Australians keep jobs in Australia, given how important spatial technologies are for this country.
Yeah, I actually think most people maybe don't realise how much they use these technologies in their everyday lives. I mean, ATM machines, the cash machines, are underpinned a lot of times by satellite.
You know, we're going to talk about the changes in our transport system. We're talking about automation. We're going to be talking about driverless buses. We're going to be talking about how do we get from point A to point B. Well, that's going to be a question for our future space industries. We're going to need to be able to get better understanding of climate change, our climate systems. We're going to need to be able to know more about land settlement issues in terms of local government. We need to be able to have a really good understanding of where our resources are, where our water is. If people get lost, you want to be able to find them quickly. If people, of course, dealing with questions of natural disaster, these are all issues that we are able to call upon our space technologies to actually help us. And I think that's why we've got to get those sorts of capabilities here. Now, look, at the moment, we're really dependent upon a series of satellites, a fleet of satellites, which are owned by other people. Our defence forces depend upon equipment owned by other people, other countries. So we've got a national sovereignty issue here. We've got an industrial capability problem, and we've got a national sovereignty problem. We've got to be able to deal with those issues in a much better way than we are at the moment. And we've been freeloading. We're freeloading. We can't do it like this. We've got this attitude, and this incredibly mendicant attitude that this country has. You know, we want to put our begging bowls out all the time, and at the same time, you know, then people say, well, why is it people treat us badly? Well, that's not necessary. We can be an independent, sovereign nation if we actually utilise the skills that we've got. Now, this is one area. This is an area of technology where we have people. We've just got to get a government determined to mobilise those people, mobilise the economic opportunities that exist, and we can take our rightful place in the world. Now, I'm not talking about, you know, Fortress Australia. I'm saying we'll be outward-looking. We can be internationalist in our approach, but at the same time be determined to defend the national interest here, so that when we set up these opportunities, we think about what's in the interest of Australia and Australians, Australian companies, Australian workers, to be able to have our part be part of a global opportunity.
Now we have startups like Fleet. For example, in South Australia, they have a new swarm of CubeSats. So you say the cost for entry to space is dropping, the cost of utilization of space is dropping. This is an exciting frontier. What would you say to a younger audience? What would they be?
Huge economic opportunities. What I'm saying to my grandchildren is that you ought to think about where the jobs of the future are. And it's here. It's jobs of the future about the sorts of things that we need to do to enable humanity to be emancipated, to actually build upon the future opportunities. Now, this is what I say is about the emancipation of the people, not enslavement. This is actually allows people to actually open up the world. And I want to see Australians at the forefront of this. Now, whether or not it's through our communication systems, whether or not it's through our understanding, our science and research capabilities, it's about whether or not we can work in industry so that we get the sort of quality jobs for the future. Now, I don't mind whether or not you're going to be working as a tradesman or whether or not you're going to be working as a research scientist. There's a place for you in this industry.
Final question, possibly the toughest one. What's it going to be called?
On that one.
Okay, well, I'll just stop the video there and stop sharing and then get back to the PowerPoint. So the reason for showing that is it's useful because it does reflect to a certain extent what's been happening over the last year and over the last sometimes 5 or 6 years in this space, where Earth observation and its application in government and industry is used as the basis for this is why we need to coordinate and help build public-private partnerships and build a capability for Australia. But then when the details do start to come out in terms of, how do we actually do this? The role of Earth observation does tend to disappear and is not included as much. So just to highlight that point, several weeks ago, Labor released their space science and industry policy. There's a copy of the first page up there. Unfortunately, like most policy documents, the links to these things are quite hard to find. The link to that document is at the bottom of the page. The front page does acknowledge Earth observation as a key component of space science and industry. But then after that, it's pretty much not mentioned at all. And if in name by itself. On pages 4 and 5, there's some key text there where they outline a space industry program to develop this, and its co-investment with ARC and setting up industry and university consortiums around transformation research hubs and training centres with PhDs, and that they would prioritise applications in these 4 points down the bottom there. So space systems, launch activities, ground systems, and space-enabled services. When I did go back and query Senator Carr's office on this policy and said, you've justified your whole policy based on supporting Earth observation, but within your document there's nothing of substance that actually will let you achieve growth in jobs, growth in industry, building on our excellence in this area. Their immediate response was, well, we've completely covered it. And they were referring to these 4 points here. So we need to engage with the Labor Party. We are going to need to engage with the current government, I think, to help them build the policies that they put forward and say, look, this is how you can change these to make sure they are successful. So, how are we actually doing that? So we have been contributing to that expert working group since it was launched in June last year, and hopefully their report and recommendations will strongly recognise our expertise in Earth observation and capability to build private-public partnerships in that area. So we've been doing that and we'll continue to do so. We will seek out and take the opportunity to brief relevant politicians on what is the position of Earth observation Australia as portrayed in our 10-year plan. So the response that went back to Senator Carr's office was quoting material straight out of our 10-year plan. As an example, Stephen Meyer, who's on the steering committee, who runs a company in Darwin, was able to connect with his local member, Luke Gosling, who then happened to have basically arranged a meeting with the Shadow Assistant Minister for Manufacturing and Science. As a result of that interaction, Stephen's been able to get input into how might Labor possibly change their policy document and what are some options that they could include to better build industry and capability. So Earth Observation Australia's role is to look for those opportunities and provide resources, to enable us to take advantage of them. There is, if people want to present an Earth Observation Australia position, we will have a process for using our resources put out on the website in the next 2 weeks for doing that, so that people can say, look, this is an acknowledged national position. What we're doing at the moment is also developing a partyless or apolitical brief to go to whichever party policy area is delivering space policy. And the aim is to produce a briefing note that we can use with politicians, their office staff who often write these policies, and departmental staff. We want to make the brief positive and be a reality check on how we can help them build and implement their policies. I mean, their policies do want to build jobs and growth in the industry, and you heard what Senator Carr said in that speech about the number of jobs he mentioned. I think the point we want to make is that Earth observation does have a sound base, in private industry, government and research. We can build it nationally and actually contribute to global markets as well. And, we have ways that we can start doing that, and we'll present options for doing that. So we're in the process of building this through the steering committee over the next 2 weeks. And when it's done, we'll make it available as well. So that's where that's going. This is just an example of some of the text that was used in response to the Labor policy on this. And what we were saying is that we're going to build on an established base of excellence. The Earth observation area lets you build upstream capabilities to support it, whether it's sensors or satellites, engaging with launch vehicle providers, enabling development of much broader sets of downstream application developers, and then also building our science and research. And then it's also critical that we point out that building this area reduces risks in critical infrastructure for Australia, for economic as well as defence activities as well. But the bottom line is, to a certain extent, we will have to be political in saying, look, we can help you achieve the objectives you have in your policy as well. Okay, I just want to switch to defence for a moment. This is something we haven't engaged with a lot previously, but it's now becoming quite important. There was a defence white paper released actually 2 years ago now, and if you have a look at that, defence now has a number of components that are based on strategic directions, but it has some capabilities. Now, those capability areas and the development and delivery of those are ones where the white paper points to having more engagement with industry and research, and Earth observation is one of those areas. So the policy statement in particular has this innovation part of it where there's some defence priorities in terms of capability, force design, foresighting, particularly around capability and enterprise needs. There's the Next Generations Technologies Fund, Innovation Hub, where defence will engage with academia, research agencies and industries to help build these solutions. So one of the things that you will see become more active in Earth Observation Australia over the next couple of months is how we engage with these sorts of needs. We already have members that are building sensors and satellites as part of defence contracts in this area. So it's something that we can build on as well. Collaborative research infrastructure. So just an update on that. One of the things of the National Research Infrastructure Plan was this research infrastructure facility to support Earth observation around calibration and validation activities, and going from experimental activities to operational. We are still waiting to hear the outcomes for the research infrastructure funding. The latest update was we will now be told in the budget announcement mid-year about how research infrastructure initiatives like this and things like TURN, IMOS, NCI and others will be funded in the long term. As an aside, this particular proposal for research infrastructure was provided to the Space Industry Capability Review Expert Working Group as a capability that could potentially be built as part of a space industry capability for Australia. Where that goes, we're not quite sure. We are trying to work out at the moment what large-scale research proposals, in addition to this, are in play. That we do know there is a Centre of Excellence proposal in place for Earth observation, upstream and downstream applications. There may be a CRC bid. There could be others. We are trying to find that out at the moment, and we'll feed that back to everyone. One of the key things that we do need to do in the research infrastructure, as well as public infrastructure, private infrastructure discussion is start to clearly identify what's available in these areas, where there's complementarities and what people do. This is a diagram I showed as part of, a presentation to the Copernicus program national meetings 2 weeks ago. And what I was trying to do is point out that at a national level and internationally, we now have a range of capabilities where different groups have invested very large amounts of money in collecting data sets and storing them in a consistent form so they can be searched and accessed automatically, which is the data portal store side of things. So things like the Australian Ocean Data Network and TERN have our terrestrial and our oceanic data sets, a lot of which are derived from Earth observation. They don't necessarily have full archive processing capability within them, and I'm keeping this separate from NCI at the moment, but they're large-scale data portals where agencies and research groups are putting Earth observation products, and you can access them manually or automatically. NCI is also part of our national research infrastructure, and it does host a large number of our data sets, as well as having some processing capability. If we go up a step, in the public space, we're now seeing the concept of data cubes, where you've got curated, consistent data sets or archives over time. There's an Australian one, which is the Digital Earth Initiative that came out of the Australian Geosciences Data Cube. That's led to similar forms overseas, like CEOS's Data Cube initiative, where other countries have things which are similar to Digital Earth Australia. The coding that's associated with that is in the open data cube space. We're now seeing private companies, so particularly Digital Globe, its GBDX platform, which is a large online consistent global database where it's a fee for service access. You can come in, you can process large sets of data over time or over space, and it's organised in the same way as a data cube. I don't call it a data cube, but that's it. This is a really important point our community needs to get its head around, which is there is not one data cube. It's now a common approach in a range of areas, and there's generally not one group that has ownership of it. Hexagon, and in terms of the Imagine, Harris and Envy also have smaller scale versions of these things. If you go to larger scales in terms of planetary data sets, that is whole of Earth coverage. Google Earth Engine is where you have whole of Landsat archive, Sentinel archives in place with processing capability next to it. At the moment, that's research public good, but there's a fee for service access to it. Planet have a similar capability, which they're about to talk about in a global context, where you will have pretty much similar full global archives as you have in the Earth Engine, with all of Planet's Dove imagery as well. Amazon are also starting to deliver these things on a global scale. And this is where you've got data, you've got compute capability and code bases next to it. Joint remote sensing is in here. It's not global, but it's at an Australian level and a little bit above. It's complete data set as well as code as well. So this is by no means is the final version of this, and we need a better way of describing what goes on in this area, which is a discussion that's starting in the steering committee at the moment, because there are some potential overlaps, and I think these groups all can potentially work together complementary, but they're not a one-on-one replacement for each other. And as a community, we need to work out how to communicate those things as well. So more on this later. It's a slightly tricky area at the moment. Okay, other updates. The Spatial Agenda 2026, which is more geospatial sciences. So again, that was something that was finalised at the beginning of 2017. they have an action plan where there was input from a range of organisations, including ourselves. The diagram on the right is the implementation plan. That is something where we are interested in having more inputs from industry in that space in future. So we weren't able to get someone to talk today, but in future we're definitely quite interested to make sure we know what's happening in this space, because Earth observations is definitely part of it. I just wanted to make a point that SIBA, the Spatial Industry Business Association of Australia, which is a group that we're engaging with more, has just released a new website, and I'd encourage people to have a look at that, and hopefully we'll have more interactions with that area in future. Switching back to government side of things, the Earth Observation for Government Network, this is something which has come out of the Digital Earth Australia program, where that particular program is looking to engage and establish key national mapping needs or monitoring requirements that can be met from Earth observation, and look at how that can be delivered effectively. This network will be running a series of workshops. The first one will be on national scale mangrove mapping. Hopefully in the next month we'll see details of that workshop, plus details of the range of topics that are being considered for upcoming workshops. And the aim of the workshops, as you can see in the little flow diagram there, is look at what's current best practice for delivering these sorts of products, what's out there, how do we deliver it, and then how should it be sort of implemented at a national level in Australia. So this is being run as an activity in Earth Observation Australia, which is going to inform Commonwealth applications in that area. Okay, international engagement. I don't have any direct reports at the moment, but I guess this is one particular item. I just turn back to the people on the call. If there's anyone that has got any key news that they want to provide, I'd normally get Alex Held to provide some input and Jonathan Ross, but unfortunately neither Alex or Jonathan could attend today. So if there's anyone that's got some points they want to add for international engagement, that would be really helpful now. So just unmute yourself. Yeah. Okay,
George. Thank you.
Yep.
Very briefly, there's a lot going on, but directly relevant to this topic of data and data cubes. At a CEOS meeting in a couple of weeks in Boulder, the European Commission will be holding a workshop on, I guess, big data systems, and we know it's an active area of development for them as well. So that'll involve the agencies you mentioned, CSIRO, GA, NASA, CEOS, as well as the European Commission. So hopefully there'll be some interesting discussions and outcomes from that. There's a lot of other things going on, but I think that's probably quite relevant to what you just spoke about.
Thanks, George. Would you be able to give us a link for that meeting so people can at least see the details?
No problem. I'll put it in the chat in a minute here.
Okay. And I guess the other question is, do you know if there are the groups like Google and Amazon are also involved in those discussions?
Not in the discussions that are going to happen in Boulder, but overall, yes, both the CEOS Systems Engineering Office and other agencies have been, I guess, speaking with Google and collaborating, and also with Amazon. I know, for example, Brian Kelo from NASA was recently at a meeting in the UK on data for development, I believe, and it was there's a big presence from Amazon there, and a lot of follow-ups around an Africa regional data cube, which Amazon is helping to establish. So yeah, it's quite an active area for CEOS as well. It is a tricky interface for CEOS and these agencies to kind of work with commercial partners, and so there's a little bit of, I think it's going to take a bit more time before that gets streamlined, but it seems to be happening.
Cool. Good. Thanks, George. That's really helpful. Arnold, did you also want to make a point?
Yeah, sure. So there is going to be a CEOS Freshwater from Space workshop in the Netherlands on the 16th and 17th of May. And the reason that was triggered is because of geo activities in Geo Aqua Watch, which is tackling freshwater, surface water, and near coastal water, and developing Earth observation applications. The Geo GLOWS working group, which is NASA-led, which is more in a hydrology-based geo group, but that also wants to do inland water quality, especially in South America and North America currently. And the Geo Wetlands group, which is a group led from the University of Bonn, who are doing, have got several big wetlands projects and using Earth observation. In combination with the fact that we have just published the CEOS feasibility study on an aquatic ecosystem Earth observing mission, which is aquatic ecosystems means inland waters right through to coral reefs, but not oceanic. And the combination of those geo activities and the CEOS report has triggered CEOS to realize that they don't have a strategy around Earth observation for inland waters, rivers, estuaries, lagoons, deltas, seagrasses, macroalgae, coral reefs, and shallow water bathymetry. And so Australia has played a reasonably significant role in some of those activities, and it's now culminated in CEOS saying, okay, we need a two-day workshop to start developing a strategy around this very important area that's been ignored by the space agencies, basically. With the space agencies, or people usually saying, oh, you can use ocean color sensors for lakes and rivers, or you can use land sensors, which neither of them are actually very well suited. We've done it for a long time, but it's not the ultimate solution. So that's one development internationally I wanted to talk about. The other one that's getting really interesting and is the whole area of using Earth observation for sustainable development goals. There are several sustainable development goals around agriculture, around oceans, around freshwater systems, and around biodiversity that are absolutely suited for being monitored by Earth observation. And the recognition is now at the United Nations level is becoming increasingly clear that Earth observation is going to play a much bigger role than they initially thought, because they've done some trial sustainable development goal reporting globally, and it's been very difficult for them to find systematic data or get it provided by countries. So they're beginning to, the United Nations definitely is now pushing the use of Earth observation for sustainable development goals, and actually the Australian government is finally also becoming convinced that Earth observation might be a great way to start reporting on Australia's progress towards meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. So there's some, these are some really important international developments that are going on. And Australia, Symbios, CSIRO, and several international groups have worked also on a report, which is available on the CEOS website, which on the use of Earth observation for Sustainable Development Goals. So there are two new reports on the CEOS website, which I can recommend to people, which is the feasibility study for an aquatic ecosystem Earth observing system, and the Sustainable Development Goals Handbook for CEOS. Finally, there's activity also in the United Nations Statistical Division, where the Australian Bureau of Statistics played a lead role for 3 years in leading the satellite and Earth observation working group, which is a bit of an odd name because it's essentially almost the same. That has now been taken over by the Canadian Bureau of Statistics. But what's interesting is that that group has given a workshop in, where was it? I think in Colombia in November or October, November, which was significantly focused on the use of Earth observation for agricultural statistics Queensland University of Technology and Desitia in Queensland contributed heavily to that workshop. There's going to be a new workshop in Bangkok in June, which again the Queensland University of Technology will participate in, Desitia, and I will participate in it. Again, to also discuss the bigger role Earth observation can have in helping official statistics in all the countries around the world, especially developing countries, and also how you can use Earth observation as a form of big data for sustainable development goal reporting. And I think that's actually quite an important different area that has a lot of effect, because the national statistical offices are the ones that should be reporting on progress towards sustainable development goals. They're all struggling with it. In many cases, they don't have any capacity at all to tackle any of these issues, and Earth observation is sometimes seen like a solution, similar to the fact that in many developing countries, people never had copper wire telephone. They went from nothing to mobile phone technology, and it seems like Earth observation is seen like that as well by many developing countries.
Right. Thanks, Arnold. Sorry to cut you off. I'm just conscious of time, and that Juan Gershman's got a point to make. Sorry.
Can I just make a short comment, which is that Microsoft, Google, and Esri are now honing in on these statistical these workshops with statistical offices and the use of Earth observation data. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. So George has just followed up on Arnold's sort of two of those points, the Earth Observation Handbook on Sustainable Development Goals. He's given us the link to that. I think, Arnold, it's important that we keep sort of updates on those sort of interactions, both at the sort of freshwater aquatic ecosystem side, and then also the SDGs and the statistical side of that, particularly for Australia's international role. So thanks for bringing them up. Juan Gershman, I think you're probably going to bring up some stuff about rangelands.
Yeah, very quickly. I am attending a workshop in a couple of weeks' time in Italy. This is a CEOS and GeoGLAM workshop. GeoGLAM is a geo group on global agriculture monitoring, and we have a role there in leading a small component on rangeland monitoring. So GeoGLAM, it's mostly about crop monitoring and has almost no, unfortunately, has almost no Australian participation. It's mostly led by the University of Maryland and several European institutions, mostly in Belgium and a few other places. But we have we lead a small component there about rangeland and pastures monitoring. And this is a follow-up workshop from something that happened from a first workshop that was already like 5 or 6 years ago, where GeoGLAM get together with CEOs and a few other institutions and discuss about the needs, the specific needs in Earth observation from the agriculture monitoring community. Last time there were a few outputs, like a number of 2 or 3 papers published in 2 or 3 journals specifying what the needs from the agriculture community are. And I expect something similar will come up from here. I haven't found any information about this workshop publicly available in the internet, nor in the GeoGLAM site or CEOS. But I suspect there is no problem if I distribute the agenda that I have. I have to check first with the GeoGLAM coordinator, but I suspect I can distribute the information about this. I don't know if you want, Stuart, any other clarification about this or this summary.
So I think if you could get that link, Juan, that would be really good. We're about to send around the survey form email link that you sent out yesterday to the whole EOA list. I guess the only question I had was about the I mean, so we're represented in terms of rangelands, but in terms of cropping, do you see that as an opportunity where we could contribute if there were people who are actively doing that sort of thing?
Oh, yes, absolutely. There are a number of activities within GeoGlam. The two main activities are one is the Global Crop Monitor, which is led by the University of Maryland with several other institutions. They produce monthly reports on the status of commodities globally with country and regional detail. Australia contributes there via the Department of Agriculture. And the other big initiative in GeoGlam is JCAM. It's more on the research side with several sites around the world doing monitoring of crop parameters like crop type, yields, and things like that. And that's the one that is also very active and has no Australian contribution. So I think it would be very good that Australia has a bigger participation in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks. I'll come back to you on that separately because there are some activities there which I think we could actually help with.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay. So thanks, Juan and Arnold and George. And just conscious of time, but that was very useful discussion on international links. Did anyone else have any other critical sort of international activities? I mean, I am aware there's a CEOS workshop on calibration validation next week as well that Cindy Ong from CSIRO and I think Madhavi Thankapan from GA will be representing Australia at, and they'll be presenting some of their activities. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. Just before we get to other business, next meeting will be in June. Before that, there will be, I think, hopefully a relatively active amount of email traffic on development of this policy briefing document in our engagement initially with the Labor Party, but also with the current government around space policy. So that'll be active over the next couple of weeks, along with details from the working groups on what they're going to do with priorities in this area as well. So just before we get to the close of things, was there any other business that people wanted to cover? I noticed people are starting to leave, but just to give everyone else an opportunity to contribute. And while people are thinking of that, we will offer a capability before these meetings in future for people to submit items that they would like to share, so we can include them as part of the material for the meeting as well. Okay.
Stuart?
Yep.
Stuart?
Go
we
on.
Just talk briefly about the Earth Observation Conference plans.
Oh, okay. Good point, Arnold. Okay. So one of the things that's been floating in the background for the last 2 years has been reinvigoration of some form of national remote sensing Earth observation conference around the lines of what we did have with the Australasian Remote Sensing and Photogrammetry Conference, which through most of the 2000s ran at several hundred plus people and generally did clear profits of $20,000 to $40,000 each time. Over the last 2 weeks, we were approached by the Brisbane Convention Centre and Marketing, along with the state government, to look for opportunities for future national and partnered meetings with groups in Asia. I've raised the issue that, we're in the process of trying to re-establish something like that. Would they actually contribute time to building a funding proposal to establish a model for a conference that would run roughly every 2 years, initially based in Brisbane, and then potentially in a alternating maybe Asian country every sort of 4+ years, say like Singapore to begin with. and it would be around the lines of sort of an Earth observation, Australia, Asia, Pacific component. So what we're hoping to build over the next month is to get the proposal documents from the convention centre on how they would like to proceed with this. One of our working groups will proceed with engaging with the convention centre and building that proposal, and I would hope to establishing a conference organising committee soon. So the aim of that is, obviously to coordinate and collaborate in Earth Observation Australia, but to also generate revenue which could be used over time as well. So thanks, Arnold. That was a really important reminder. Cool. All right. Any other points people think we should mention? Just wary that we're over time. Okay. If there's not, I'd just like to thank everybody for their time, and again to Joe for setting things up and making things run. The recording and slides and other material will be online over the next week, and we'll be in touch quite soon again, basically on that policy brief and some other activities. So I'll look forward to talking to everyone, and again, thanks for your time today.